I never imagined the person I promised forever would be the one plotting my ruin, and that my own family would be folded into the plan like a paper boat set to sink. If you're new here, subscribe. I post true feel stories every day. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what you'd do if you found out your spouse had been lying to you. My name is Mira, I'm 26, and this is the story of how love turned into a calculation, how a wedding vow became a ledger, and how I learned that revenge, if you do it at all, should be precise and, when possible, merciful. We met in grad school, Daniel and I. He had the kind of laugh that made rooms softer and a mind that ran like a tuned engine. We married 2 years after graduation in a small ceremony with my family in the front row. And we promised each other things like stability and honesty and, embarrassingly, forever. At first, everything was ordinary in that comforting way ordinary lives are. Bills paid, a small apartment that smelled of coffee and books, weekend hikes, and an inexplicable, steady happiness. Daniel had a job in procurement at a mid-tier supplier company. Not glamorous, but respectable, and he was quietly ambitious. Always reading market reports, always asking questions. My parents adored him. My sister Lila, who lived across town, liked him because he made me laugh. My mother called him our boy at Sunday dinner, and he always pretended to blush. The first crack came in a text. A tiny, stupid thing that would have been meaningless in another life. I saw it on Daniel's phone when he left it on the counter. An offhand message from someone named R. About a transfer and to hold off until Monday. I thought nothing of it. I assumed work. But the way he flinched when I later asked if everything was fine, the small tightening near his eyes, made me start keeping mental notes. People hide simple things for simple reasons. Surprise parties, secret birthday plans. But they hide big things for big reasons. And once you start noticing, the cascade begins. One evening, months later, I came home early from work. My company had given us the afternoon off, and I thought I'd surprise Daniel with lunch. The hallway was quiet, and when I opened our door I saw his jacket on the chair and his laptop open on the coffee table. There was an email draft open that said, in blunt transactional language, reroute payment to 97-44cc for expediency. My heart thudded like a fist against my ribs. I closed the laptop gently and sat on the couch as if I were waiting for a bus. When Daniel walked in, he was smiling, the same easy smile he always had. "Hey babe," he said, kissing my forehead. "Did you get time off? I thought you had a meeting." Kept my face neutral. "I got the afternoon. I thought we could grab lunch." He seemed relieved. Relief, I learned, is a poor mask. I started watching. Not in a paranoiac way, but with a quiet attention that reads patterns like a detective reads footprints. The transfers kept coming, small and staggered, running through shell accounts with names that read like fantasy. Cobalt Consulting, Peakline Holdings. They were disguised in vendor lists as consulting fees or logistics adjustments. Daniel said the company was being audited and that little administrative shuffles were normal. He sounded convincing. I believed him for a week. Then I found the receipt. It was tucked into a book on his side of the shelf. A luxury hotel stay in a coastal town with a credit route that matched none of our accounts. The dates lined up with the time he claimed to be at a quarterly conference. I confronted him that night in our kitchen while rain made the window blurry. He looked at me for a long time, like someone deciding whether to fall on a sword. "Mira, it's complicated," he said. "It's not what you think." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe forever with him as we had sworn. But the word forever started to sound like a location on a map I didn't know how to reach anymore. What I learned next made the knife turn. A casual lunch with my sister Lila, coffee, lemon tort, turned into a confession without her meaning to. Lila had been visiting my phone contacts for a charity drive, and we'd been laughing at old photos when she slipped. "Did you ever notice how Marcus always calls on weekends?" she said, referring to my cousin. "And how he and Daniel are always quiet on the phone." Her voice was innocent, but the seed was planted. I had never really looked at my extended family's finances. I had assumed, like everyone else, that Daniel was a professional and that relatives were family and that our worlds didn't mix like that. But my father had sworn me once that the most dangerous people in the world are the ones who can smile and then calculate. He had been a banking auditor in his youth, and he told stories at dinner about how easy trust makes people careless. So I dug. Quietly. Patiently. I wanted proof. Not the loose dust of suspicion but the weight of facts. What I found made the world tilt. Daniel had not simply been diverting company funds. He had been doing it in collaboration, with a hand I loved and a family I trusted. Payments that once looked like simple vendor adjustments ended in accounts tied to a holding company co-owned by my cousin Marcus and, worse, a private firm registered under my mother's maiden name. My mother's name. My mother. When I saw the documents, my stomach dropped into something cold and empty. There were signatures and memos, post-it notes with half instructions. The money had been moved to pay off debts, to fund a renovation on a house in the countryside that Marcus had recently bought, and to shore up a business venture that my mother had personally vouched for. Notes from Daniel discussed protecting the family brand and smoothing transitions. The ledger read like a family narrative rewritten into numbers. I didn't react publicly. I wrapped the documents and put them into a secure folder. Private revenge starts as strategy before it becomes theater, if it becomes theater at all. The complexity of betrayal is that it rarely stands alone. It threads and knots. It implicates people you once called safe. My mother had always told me that family came first. She had taught me to braid hair and to make an omelette and how to iron a shirt just so. Now, reading her handwriting on petty memos that redirected funds, her voice as warm as butter on toast turned into a shrill metallic thing in my head. A confrontation would have been the melodramatic thing to do. A shout, the slamming of doors, a cut-off of ties. But I had seen what heat did to judgment. I wanted something cooler, a dismantling that exposed both motive and consequence, and I wanted them to have room to explain themselves in the light of evidence before the public came knocking. I reached out to someone I trusted, a friend from grad school, Anna, who had become a compliance officer for a non-profit. She knew how audits began and how small discrepancies blossom into large investigations. I gave her copies of the files and asked, quietly, whether there was a legal route that could both protect the employees who would be harmed by a sudden collapse and still hold the guilty accountable. She didn't hesitate. "You found fire," she said. "Don't throw it into a forest. Let's channel it." We moved like chess players. First, secure the documents and a few allied witnesses who had seen odd checks or mysterious invoices. Second, whistleblower channels and anonymous tips to investigative journalists who had courage but also discipline. Third, a timing when the revelation would have maximal impact and minimal collateral pain. Because the most important part of revenge is not that your enemies suffer, it's that the truth is known in a way that can't be easily rewritten. The timing presented itself at a family event, my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. It was to be a polished affair in the banquet hall of the hotel Marcus had purchased, the same one that had eaten the diverted funds. Magnets would be assembled. Family, friends, city officials, vendors, everyone who loved the veneer. On the night of the anniversary, I dressed in simple black, nothing flashy. Vengeance dressed loud makes people look for the wrong motive. I walked into a room of smiling faces that smelled of roses and buttercream. Cameras flashed. Marcus and my mother greeted guests like royalty. Daniel stood beside them, his hand casually resting on my arm as if we were still a unit. I did not move. I had rehearsed my speech in the car on the way there, not for the words themselves but to steady the voice that would tell truth. When the cake was cut and the toasts began, I asked to speak. The MC blinked, surprised. "We have a long evening planned," she said pleasantly. Smiled. "This will be brief," I said. Anna, sitting 3 rows back, gave me the nod that said she had the records queued and a journalist friend had the verified file ready to publish if the room turned ugly. I spoke plainly. I laid out transactions, dates, and the links between shell accounts and properties. I read small memos that used language like ensure family continuity and protect brand, and as I read, I watched faces change. My mother's jaw tightened. Marcus's eyes went incredulous. Daniel's face remained the face of a man who would still pretend he was doing this for love. When I finished, there was a silence that felt like the space between heartbeats. Then someone in the crowd, a vendor who'd been cheated, stood and thanked me. Phones were out. People began to murmur. The room, which had been a script of ritual, now became a court of questions. What followed was messy and inevitable. Regulators were called. Reporters arrived. Daniel's employer suspended him pending investigation. Marcus's titles were frozen. My mother retreated to a corner like someone who had lost the ability to perform. There were shouts and clarifications and bitter, quiet apologies that sounded like they belonged in a different life. People asked me whether I regretted the public spectacle. The answer is complicated. In the first weeks I felt a paradox, vindication and a hollow. I had exposed the lie, but truth is not always a balm. Employees whose wages depended on the firm's projects fretted. Vendors worried about unpaid invoices. The ripple of our family's collapse landed on people unrelated to the greed that had caused it. But then something unexpected happened. My mother, stripped of her social armor, began to tell stories. To me at first, then to the family, then quietly to the town. She spoke of fear and of choices made when she thought it would keep us whole. She told me how Marcus had leaned on her with promises and how Daniel had whispered that he would secure us if she helped him get ahead. Her voice was broken and small and human. My anger softened, not into forgiveness, but into an understanding of complexity. I used what money remained in my father's accounts, small savings tucked away for emergencies, to start a fund to help hourly workers get through the audits and restructurings. I worked with Anna to ensure that whistleblowers were protected and that regulators had the full picture. I talked to the vendors and apologized with a clarity that is rare. I admitted the family's guilt publicly and promised restitution where possible. It was the least I could do to prevent the innocent from paying too dearly for other people's crimes. Months later, Daniel faced charges and left town under a cloud I could breathe around without seeing him. Marcus's properties were seized to cover debts. My mother volunteered at a local nonprofit that fed families, perhaps to find breathing space beneath service. Lila and I rebuilt what trust we could by small acts. Coffee at dawn, shared errands, sitting in a dentist's waiting room and commenting on magazines, normal things that felt like stitches. I won't claim I felt triumphant every morning. Revenge bent my edges. It taught me that truth has a cost and that responsibility must come after exposure. If you pull a thread out from a tapestry, you must be ready to sew. But I also learned that there is a particular power in naming, in saying plainly what has been hidden, and in not letting the story end with a whispered apology. So I'll end with what I asked at the beginning. What would you do if you found your spouse in the middle of a conspiracy that involved your family? Would you expose them and accept the fallout? Or would you step away and carry the truth like a private wound? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read all of them. If you're new here, subscribe. I'll keep telling stories that make you think about the shape of loyalty and the strange geometry of truth.